the needs of parents are as vast as your imagination will take you. When parents are trying to solve for those problems or navigate the unknown, they are spending their time looking through their neighborhood Facebook groups or parenting groups or Sir Google. You know what I mean? They're spending all of this time to try to figure it out on their own. Most of the time, when you're trying to figure it out on your own, you're doing it during business hours, right? If you're trying to connect with other business owners, they're open at the same time that you're working for your job. So employers come to us and they say, hey, my employees need help just navigating the ins and outs of the challenges that they're facing. Sure, there's childcare challenges, but there's also adult care challenges.
Good morning, HR. I'm Mike Coffey, and this is the podcast where I talk to business leaders about bringing people together to create value for shareholders, customers, and the community. Please follow, rate, and review Good Morning HR wherever you get your podcast. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or at goodmorninghr.com. Care.com is the world's largest online marketplace for childcare, senior care, special needs care, and even things like tutoring, pet care, and housekeeping. And just full disclosure up front, through our PFC Caregiver and household screening brand, my company, Imperative, provides background checks to many of the families who find caregivers through Care.com. Having said all of that, Care.com released their 10th annual Cost of Care report earlier this summer. As we discussed in our June episode about the Ready Nation report on the child care crisis, the availability of care continues to shrink while the prices continue to rise. That presents challenges for both employers and employees. Joining me to discuss the Cost of Care report's findings and ways that employers can assist their employees in meeting these challenges is Jess Marble. Jess is the Director of Care for Business, the enterprise division of Care.com, where she advocates for comprehensive, equitable, and scalable caregiving benefits to support leading employers and their workforces. Welcome to Good Morning HR, Jess.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
So let's just start with the Cost of Care report. What were the key findings that were really relevant to employers' concerns?
I think the 10th anniversary of the Cost of Care report gave us some insight into how the cost of childcare in the United States has changed over to the past decade and how truly expensive and unavailable caregiving is to working parents today. Big takeaways from the report, 75% of parents are saying that they don't have a childcare center within 20 minutes of their home, or 50% of parents have said that they've been on wait lists for 3 or more months. Childcare is expensive and it's very, very hard to find.
And then you say that's over the last 10 years, those challenges have continued, those have increased. So let's just talk about where I thought the report was interesting because it uses the term care villages, which I wasn't familiar with. Can you talk about care villages and where people find their care, where they get their care for their kids?
Yeah. So a care village is describing the infrastructure or the people that working parents lean on to find care for their loved ones, for their children. 45% of parents that we surveyed actually are looking for childcare in non-traditional hours, which means they have to get a little bit creative when it comes to creating their care village today. So we're seeing parents are leaving the life they've built and they're moving to be closer to friends and family. They're changing their complete lifestyle. We know that parents are taking on multiple jobs. 29% of working single mothers with hourly jobs are taking on one or more to compensate for the cost of care. We also know that employees are turning to their employers. Offering childcare benefits is starting to become an expectation, especially if you expect employees to show up and be productive at work.
So those non-traditional work hours, you're talking other than the 8 to 5 type shift when your traditional daycare is open. So third shift, evening shifts, things like weekends,
Exactly.
those kind of things.
Exactly. Doctors and nurses have children. Those who kind of keep this country running while we get to sleep at night, they have children too, and they also have child care needs.
Yeah, we just had a episode a few weeks ago about frontline workers and these essential workers that we talked about so much in 2020. And it seems like what
Yeah,
you're saying is those are the folks who are most impacted by these childcare challenges.
exactly.
And so, how does all of this then affect employers? What do you see as the impact on employers from these challenges?
The fact of the matter is, without care, people can't work. They can't show up to work to be their best self. They can't be productive. They can't be reliable. So, while this is a challenge that families have been facing forever, I think employers are starting to recognize that this is actually a business problem. I think the pandemic highlighted the impact that our childcare infrastructure has on their business. So now employers recognize this as a threat to the productivity that their employees can have and potentially their retention rates. Because when it comes between choosing to care for the ones you love or showing up for work, you're going to care for the ones you love the most.
And you mentioned people having to relocate to be closer to family and to, or other caregiver sorts, people, friends, things like that. And I would guess that, certainly a lot of these folks are sitting behind desks and maybe can work remote if they can find, but a lot of the essential workers or those frontline workers have to be there to serve customers or work on a production line or whatever,
Mhm.
actually, be present in a physical space. And if they're relocating, that means those employers are losing that talent too.
Yeah, I mean, relocation shouldn't be what we have to turn to find care because you've built and you've created this life for yourself, and to uproot that affects so many other areas of your life. Your job could be compromised. You may be impacting the lives of your loved ones who are stepping into care for your children. So it's not really a win-win situation for anybody.
We mentioned relatives and friends and daycare centers.
Hmm.
A big part of what care.com does is connect people to nannies or babysitters,
Hmm.
people like that. Do you have an idea of what percentage of folks are using those kind of services versus just relying on daycare?
Millions of
Okay.
families rely on our services. I think what we're observing, though, is for the first time in our research, relying on an in-home caregiver is actually, if cost and availability had nothing to do with it, the in-home option is what families prefer most.
Oh, sure.
When you're looking at the childcare crisis that we have in the United States, child care centers are a huge part of that crisis. During the pandemic, so many child care centers closed down. Thousands and thousands of their employees had to find work elsewhere. And so you have an infrastructure problem now that isn't going to be resolved because of a shortage of availability, but also employees who can help with that particular care infrastructure.
And I think the report said families on average are spending 27% of
Hmm.
their income on care. That seems pretty steep. But I
Yeah.
think a lot of it, you know, these are, the people who are out there breeding are younger than me. And so, they're earlier in their career often. And so that's a big
Yeah.
chunk out of your career if you're trying to, out of your income, if you're trying to, build your family security into the future.
It's a huge chunk, and it's actually three times what the Department of Health and Human Services says is affordable for families to pay for care. They say that it's affordable to pay for childcare if you're paying 7% of your income. But like you said, families are paying three or four times that, which just is not feasible for the majority of American families.
No, yeah. And so, that begs the question, I guess, what are families doing? How do they navigate that?
It's well, there isn't a magic wand, that's for sure. We see families have to uproot and they have to move closer to their loved ones. We see families taking on additional jobs. We know that single mothers, for example, who are working an hourly job, over 40% of them take on one or more jobs to help with the cost of care. But we also see families turning to their employers to help mitigate this rub they have between balancing the caregiving needs they have at home and their responsibilities at work.
So, when a family turns to their employer, what kind of services can an employer really provide? Because traditionally that's outside of the realm of most traditional employee benefits or what
Mm-hmm.
or something that most employers are willing to tackle. So, what do you see employers doing, and what did the report suggest employers ought to consider?
I've been with CARE for almost 7 years. And during my tenure at CARE, what I've come to recognize is that the employers who are starting to offer these benefits more and more are better representing the demographics of our entire nation. So, what I mean by that is caregiving benefits used to be a very privileged benefit for big tech companies or law firms or those who are known for having the most compelling benefits as an employer. But we're seeing now that it's kind of becoming a must have, a standard benefit for employers if they need to compete at all. So when we look at the types of benefits that employers can offer, you're kind of designing programs that address three core areas of caregiving challenges. The first is finding care. Care is hard to find. There is limited availability across this entire nation. It doesn't matter where you work, you have that problem. Second is affording care. Care is expensive, like we just said, and families are paying 4 times as much as what our government says should be affordable for childcare. And we know that when you are a parent, navigating the woes of raising children can be difficult and confusing and sometimes lonely. So employers are investing in solutions that help all three of those problems.
Well, let's tackle just the first one then. Just finding care. If I've got employees who are in a I guess what we'd call a care desert, where there you said they there's some percentage that don't have a care child care within 20 minutes, I think you said. So how does an employer help there?
So, employers turn to providers like Care for Business by care.com to access a network of caregivers that we have with our platform. You said yourself, care.com is the leading platform for finding and managing care. So, we have something that can benefit the workforce. So, first and foremost, employers are coming to us and saying, hey, my employees need a tool to find background check caregivers to help them at every stage of life. So, we're talking about newborn care, then after school care, and then even resources to help with tutoring as you get older.
And so using care to hire, and these are primarily then in-home caregivers in those situations.
In home or out of home, the network
Okay,
covers all of that. So that's tool number one to help you find regular care, right?
okay,
Because that's the problem that everybody has. But the other problem that employers have to solve for is how do you address caregiving needs when regular care falls through?
sure.
And that's where something called backup care comes into play.
And so that's something we see. I mean, we went remote in 2020, and my listeners are tired of hearing this, but we're not going back. And it's
Yeah.
worked great for us, except that I have
Yeah.
a number of young parents as employees, and they've got care until they don't.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody's
Right.
sick, either their caregiver whose family is
Mm-hmm.
ill, or their kid's sick and they can't send them wherever they normally send them. And so
Mm-hmm.
how does that backup care work?
So, from an employee's perspective, when they have access to a backup care benefit, when they know care is not going to be available or when care falls through, they can log in through an app like the Care for Business app and they can input the days and times that they need care. Then we take our powerhouse of a network of backup caregivers, either in home or out of home caregivers, and we match that family with a caregiver who can meet their caregiving needs, either by coming to their house or finding a slot for them in one of our child care center partners' locations. So, from an employer's perspective, they come to us and they design a program that includes a set number of backup care days. And they can give their employees, let's say, 10 to 15 days of backup care per year. The employees pay a copay for that backup care. So that helps to address the affordability of care. Daycare drop-in rates can be $150, $250 a day, depending on where you live in the country. So if you have to decide between making your hourly wage or paying that much money, again, work is going to lose out. So employees just pay a small copay from the employer subsidized program.
And so the employer's benefit is you don't lose the productivity of a day that's either burned in PTO or maybe it's even a situation where this person's out of PTO and they're just missing. You got an employee who's not getting paid and you're not getting productivity, and the cost to the employer in a program like that may well be a lot less than the cost of not having that employee available for the day.
Yeah. I mean, the immediate cost savings is in the prevented productivity loss that an employer essentially saves with the use of backup care. We see backup care users on average miss 10 fewer days of work per year because of the access they have to backup care. But I think the benefit to the employer stems past productivity savings. You very quickly become an employer of choice. Every single time, 10 times a year, your employee is recognizing how you've saved the day for the most precious human in their life. So you have quite a bit of loyalty now that's coming to you as an employer when you offer a benefit like this.
And so this backup care, what are these normally like we're dropping them off at a daycare, or is this somebody who's coming into the home, or how do these work? Well, where's that care delivered?
Yeah, good question. I think the benefit of the Care for Business backup care program is all of the flexible options that both employers and employees can choose from. So there's essentially 3 ways that employees can access backup care. Number 1 is you can say, I'd like to have a nanny come into my home. There's a benefit to that. Let's take a parent who has 2 children, for example. They can have a nanny come into their home, which will use 1 day of backup care, and they only have to pay their hourly copay for 1 day. Or an employee can say, I don't want a nanny to come to my home, or an employee can say, I don't want a nanny to come to my home because I work from home and I need the peace and quiet. I'm going to take my kids to a local child care center that has availability for a drop-in day. The advantage to that is the children are out of the home, they get to socialize with other children, but it uses up 2 of their backup care days and they pay 2 daily copays because essentially it's taking up 2 slots of care. So that's a little behind the scenes on how that works. Now, the third type of backup care that's available is something called personal network backup care. So with personal network backup care, employees can say, hey, look, I have this reliable caregiver that I use on a regular basis who can come and care for my kids. Can I just be reimbursed for that care? Why, yes, you can. You can be reimbursed for that care, just like how your employer would pay for that backup care day. And then you're only responsible essentially for paying your copay.
And if we're let's say we're going to go to the office and we're going to leave that kid who's, for whatever reason, needs care that day because their caregiver's not available or whatever, and they're going to come to the house. That gives people liver quiver. I've got some stranger coming into my house to take care of my kid. Can you talk a little bit about, at least in the care.com, the Care for Business piece, how y'all address those kinds of concerns?
Sure. All of our backup caregivers that come into the home have been background checked. We partner with the best nanny agencies around the country to help fulfill some of those in-home backup care requests. But parents also have an opportunity during the booking process to request a time to speak with or meet the caregiver prior to them coming to their home. So when the backup care day is confirmed, we match you with the right caregiver for your home. You get a profile of the caregiver, and then you also get a chance to connect with them before they show up.
So these care days, sometimes we find out that morning. You find out that
Mm-hmm.
the babysitter is out, and so can it be turned around that quickly generally, or does an employee typically kind of try to line somebody up just so that they know that they've already got somebody that they're comfortable with, or how does that work I
Mm-hmm.
can see if I know my caregiver is getting married and is going to be gone for 3 days next
Mm-hmm.
month, I can plan ahead. But what about
Mm-hmm.
those short-term immediate concerns?
Yeah, backup care can be used for those immediate concerns. Absolutely. One misconception about backup care is that it typically is used for last minute care, like what you just described. But in the decade plus that we've been providing backup care to employers, we actually see that over 75% of our days is not a same or a next day request. We typically see parents, the breakdown that they most often have when it comes to childcare are school holidays, teacher prep days, planned absences from their nanny. Now, yes, there are times where you need next day or same day care, and that's why we have an expansive network so we can accommodate those same day requests.
And let's take a quick break. Good Morning HR is brought to you by Imperative, premium background checks with fast and friendly service. In a perfect world, all your applicants would be honest with you, and your background checks would simply confirm that. But if all your applicants were honest, I'd be out of work. So every day we give employers bad news. Maybe we found a criminal record that the applicant failed to divulge, or that college from which they claimed a degree, never heard of them, or it was a degree mill, or a previous employer told us that the guy was terminated for punching out the HR manager. Whatever it is, employers have legal requirements to follow when the information on the background check may lead to the applicant not being hired or any other action by the employer that might be construed as adverse by the applicant. If based in whole or part on the background check, the employer does decide to take an adverse action, the federal Fair Credit Reporting Act requires that the employer provide the applicant a copy of the report and a summary of their rights under the law. This can be provided electronically or via hard copy delivered in person or by mail. Imperative's secure online reporting system makes it easy for an employer to share this information with applicants electronically just by clicking a button. Some of our clients will then just pick up the phone and call the applicant asking, "Hey, do you have a minute to review your background check with me?" You should have an email with a link to review it. Then they can discuss the information with the applicant and get their side of the story. Once the information has been received by the applicant, the employer can take the adverse action. Then, the Fair Credit Reporting Act requires that they provide the applicant a second notice describing the adverse action and providing the applicant additional information, including how to contact the background screening company to dispute the information. These are easy requirements to follow, but judging from the many class action lawsuits against employers, a lot of them just don't do it right. Also, employers should remember that some states also have their own adverse action requirements on top of those in the FCRA. If you have questions about the FCRA's requirements or how Imperative can help you make well-informed decisions about the people you involve in your business, visit us at imperativeinfo.com. If you're an HRCI or SHRM certified professional, this episode of Good Morning HR has been pre-approved for 1/2 hour of recertification credit. To obtain the recertification information, visit goodmorninghr.com and click on Research Credits. Then select episode 114 and enter the keyword CARE, that's CARE. And if you're looking for even more recertification credit, check out the webinars page at imperativeinfo.com. And now back to my conversation with Jess Marble. Interesting. So that covers the finding care piece. Then you mentioned
Hmm.
affording care, and you talked a little bit about on the backup care, the copay and the employer subsidy. What else are employers doing to try to make care more affordable?
So employers can help employees afford care through a few different tactics. One, employers can come to a partner like Care for Business, where we work with leading childcare centers around the country and negotiate childcare discounts on behalf of our client partners. So we see families that participate in this benefit can save $1,600 a year, for example, on full-time tuition. When you think about the cost of care, how for a lot of families, they're paying upwards of $18,000 a year, nearly twice the cost of in state tuition. $1,600 on average is certainly a benefit to have. We also see employers contributing to reimbursement accounts. So they may help employees cover a portion of the regular care costs through like a reimbursement or a subsidy program.
Okay. So, and again, those are benefits that are just driven by the employer's desire to help with that.
Mhm.
And those reimbursement accounts are, I guess, either funded by the employer, but then uh, through the health savings accounts or dependent care accounts, employees can also set aside an amount each year to at least
Exactly.
get that at a tax free dollars.
Through their dependent child care accounts.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
And then that last really big one you mentioned was just navigating the complexities of
Yeah.
being responsible for care and all. What are the complexities? I mean, we've talked about cost and those the shortage. What are the other
Mhm.
complexities that affect an employee who's trying to give care to their kids or even to an elder or something like that?
Yeah. Uh, I mean, we can walk through Barnes and Noble and we can see rows and rows of parenting books, right? But you never really know what's going to happen until you're in the throes of parenting. And
Preach.
oftentimes, oftentimes, you are faced with situations that you have to figure out on your own. For example, I have a child with special needs. I need to figure out how to advocate for them with their school system to make sure they have the right resources. Or I'm looking for a child care provider that speaks dual languages, just like what we practice in our home. The needs of parents are as vast as your imagination will take you. When parents are trying to solve for those problems or navigate the unknown, they are spending their time looking through their neighborhood Facebook groups or parenting groups or Sir Google. You know what I mean? They're spending all of this time to try to figure it out on their own. Most of the time, when you're trying to figure it out on your own, you're doing it during business hours, right? If you're trying to connect with other business owners, they're open at the same time that you're working for your job. So employers come to us and they say, hey, my employees need help just navigating the ins and outs of the challenges that they're facing. Sure, there's childcare challenges, but there's also adult care challenges. Millennials are the largest generation in the workforce. They're also the largest generation in the sandwich generation. So they're trying to figure out how to raise their kids, and now they're trying to figure out how to care for their parents or their grandparents. So they can call and use a benefit. They can call our team is called the care specialist. They can use a benefit where they have 24/7 access to experts, childcare experts, senior care experts that they can just talk to, explain their problem, and just get help navigating through that problem, finding and negotiating resources, whatever it may be, to kind of take that burden off of their shoulders to find the help they need. We see at Care that this particular service saves parents an average of 17 hours of lost productivity every single time they use it.
Yeah, I can totally imagine that because I just look back at our stuff. I mean, and we were in a really privileged position because we own our company,
Mhm.
and but I was thinking about the number of times something would happen and we didn't know, and we have friends who we can turn to, but having somebody who really knows, and I use a lot of business resources and mentorships
Mhm.
and people I know and trust to navigate business issues. But I know most of your HR professionals out there do not want to be responsible for those, and don't have
No.
that expertise. And as soon as you put a binder of here's a binder full of solutions for answers to frequently asked questions around something like caregiving and resources and all
Mhm.
that, that's going to be out of date the minute you stick it up on on your wiki or
Yeah.
on your shelf. So they can just this is just and we're talking a lot, listeners, about care.com because that's who we're talking to, but I'm sure there's
Yeah.
other services out there that do the
Oh,
same
yeah.
thing. And so I'm not just shilling for care.com, but they're good customers, so consider them. But having that resource would be a really valuable thing for an employee that you know take and keeps the HR department from taking on that burden.
Right. Absolutely.
That's great. Well, what else do you think? What as we're running up on time, but as a parting shot, what do you think that anything else you think we should share with employers about assisting their
Mhm.
employees who are caregivers?
Yeah. Let's talk about options that may not cost as much money, right? We know
Oh, we
benefit
like
budgets
those.
are,
Yeah,
we like those. We know benefit budgets are tight. We know implementing new benefits takes time. And of course, there's partners like Care for Business that want to work with you on that. But there's also things that you can do right now with your employees to help make lives a little easier for working parents. Here's an idea. Look at your employee resource groups or your affinity groups and find those champions internally and talk to them. You can create mentors between new parents when they or mentorships between new parents when they re-enter the workforce and parents who have been navigating that journey for a while. That gives employees who are new to the parenting journey somebody to turn to and find guidance. So that's one example.
so an affinity group is, I mean, a lot of companies have affinity groups around race or even, cultural differences, things like that. I've never even thought about an affinity group for parents who are dealing
Yeah.
with that. That seems like a no brainer. That's yeah, that would be great, right?
Yes, they're amazing. And you often find that your parents' resource groups or your working mom groups or however it's formed at your company, you often find that these are the biggest champions and the most passionate employees when it comes to the benefits and the programs that you offer. They can be a huge asset and an HR partner when it comes to helping keep in touch with what the workforce is asking for, but also how they're receiving the information that's being shared. I'm a huge fan of employee resource groups.
That's
So,
great. What else?
yes. So, idea number one, employee resource groups. Idea number two, I'm a big champion of turning to your managers. Your managers are the front line of your
Sure.
workforce. They are the first ones who understand the pain points employees are feeling. They're the first ones who observe when working parents may be missing work or feeling distracted. So, one of the most powerful things that you can do is make sure your managers are armed with the information they need to help support as soon as they identify a need from their employees. So I'm sure if you have options like an EAP or you have a dependent childcare program or whatever benefits you have available or programs in house, make sure that the managers are spreading the good word about those so employees can take advantage of what exists today. So those are my top two.
Well, yeah, that's great, and I think that's. I mean, I spent my whole HR career running away from anything with numbers, and that included benefits. But I know from my friends who are benefits folks, one of the big challenges is employees don't even use the benefit because they don't understand it or don't know it
Yeah.
or don't believe it's accessible, as easily as it may be. And that's frontline management, just continually driving those things home, especially, hopefully before there's a problem, before we're in a point where we're in a critical position around performance. And hey,
Yeah.
we've got an attendance policy, and you've missed, and what's going on? And well, I've had this issue with my caregiver. Well, if the manager had known that, or if the manager had thought about how can I help early in this process, we may not be at this position where we're talking about performance.
Yeah. And those conversations could be so much more productive if at the moment you identify or perceive a problem, you can come with some recommended solutions to help in that very first conversation.
Well, that's perfect. That's all the time we have, too. So thank you for joining me today, Jess.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
And thank you for listening. You can comment on this episode or search our previous episodes at goodmorninghr.com or on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. And don't forget to follow us wherever you get your podcast. Rob Upchurch is our technical producer, and you can reach him at robmakespods.com. And thank you to Imperative's marketing coordinator, Marianne Hernandez. She and Rob do most of the work. I just show up and ask smart people dumb questions. And I'm Mike Coffey. As always, don't hesitate to reach out if I can be of service to you personally or professionally. I'll see you next week, and until then, be well, do good, and keep your chin up.